adjustments to order. January 11th, 2022 at 6 p.m. We're here for one item of business. It's a public hearing on property at 422 Curtis and 110 Emerson Street. Their petition for a variance for relief from land use code. And proposed variance petition is submitted by Danielle and Clinton McDonald. So the first item on the agenda after opening the meeting, we'll invite the staff to give a summary of the petition and answer any questions.
Before you do that, can I add something?
Yes.
Clinton, who has a construction company, I believe it's Great Plains as well. He's under contract with my wife and I to build a fence at my house. So I thought I'd just bring that to y'all's attention. I don't know if that's a conflict of interest, but however you want me. If you don't want me to vote on it, I don't have a problem with it either way.
I don't have a problem with it.
I don't either. But good for you, Neil, for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Your first meeting in your...
Yeah, I know, my first
you're
meeting,
really
I
up to
saw his
speed,
name and I
yeah.
thought, oh,
Yeah.
great.
Well, the other, I guess, in the same part of disclosure of that is that I'm on the hospital board at Banner.
Oh,
And she's
right.
a doctor there, but I don't know that that has any bearing.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard in a small town to not.
You're right.
Right.
Correct. And I'm glad you brought it because we had talked about it on staff. And typically a conflict of interest is usually when there's some kind of financial compensation and you're paying him, not he's paying you. So I think that kind of relieves it. But it is good to disclose no matter what.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
That's why I did.
Thanks for
good call. So what we have tonight, you had a chance to look over the petition request. I tried to be a little bit earlier this time than last minute, I think from last time, and but being a little bit more studious when it comes to presenting these things to you guys. We will see many more. I've got plenty on the docket for us. We just couldn't get it lined up for tonight, so we have a few other things that will be coming before you. So just a heads up for the next meeting. You know, and when I was in Augusta, this board met regularly, and so it was always agenda items on the list. But in this case, we're really as needed, and so either we can work it out in staff where we don't have to, or they have to do a little bit more research to make sure that this is what they want to do, a variance, and you have to build your case to make sure this fits the requirements of the guidelines. So I'll say that.
Well, kind of a point of information on that is we used to meet more frequently until the city developed a new sign code, and that seemed to have
Oh, that makes sense.
Really
ended our-
diminished the number of
Yeah.
meetings. Yes.
Yeah, and it's good sign code. Most of the time,
Apparently.
I can figure out of where it pertains to, and make it, and then they usually agree to that. And so there's only a couple times where we almost had to take it to you guys, but they decided to go back to the standard. So
back to the
back to the meat. All right. So what we have today is a variance request. Let me give you the narrative behind the scenes. What you got a chance to read it already, but their end goal is to subdivide this. There's two principal structures on one parcel, and they came to me even before they bought the property and disclosed that that's what their intention was. And I said, it's always a gamble. You don't know what's going to happen, so you can't. There's no guarantees that any of this could happen, so they bought it and used it as an investment property. But their real end goal is to kind of help subdivide it and then sell it off to two different parties so they can have homes themselves. Because the way it is right now, you can't sell it off to, even if they subdivide, there's still a lot more requirements. They have to have separate water, separate utilities, and things like that. But their goal is to subdivide. The dilemma that we have is council has made it clear when I came on staff, do not create a new non-conforming use. And so by subdividing right now, it would create a new one. And so in order to get around that, we have to give a variance to allow that so that when they subdivide it, it's a legally non-conforming. You're not creating a new one. So that's the reason why we're here. We're having to do it in steps. Okay? we could have gambled to take it over there, but then they would still have to bring it back here, and it just got confusing. So going by the book made it, I guess it's better. It just takes longer, this route. So just keep that in mind. The issue that we really have is the zoning part of the code for residential low density is designed for large lots and single family, okay? As you can see in your setbacks are normally 20 feet front, 5 side, which is one of the cases we took before. There was a 4 foot, but really 5 foot because it was the fence that was in the wrong place, not necessarily the lot. And the rear is 15, so you have 25, 15. That's your setbacks. A minimum lot size in the residential low density is 7,500 square feet. That's normal, and when I did the research on this property, it's already non-conforming because the total is 7,000 for both of those. Now, when you go over and look at it, it still has to somewhat correct setbacks, even though one is slightly smaller, 17.5 feet versus 20 feet. But there's still plenty of square feet, even for the minimum open space requirement. So I think it's 1,500 open space. They have that even with the 7,000 square foot minimum lot that they have. So that's one issue, that's both of the issues. You have the setback for the house on 110 Emerson is shorter than the requirement. Requirement's 20 feet, there's a 17.5 feet. The other issue is once you subdivide, now you're looking at 3,500 per each lot. And so that's well under that minimum of what that zoning is. So I asked them, according to the code, and to fill out why they believe that they should even meet the requirements. And so I want to go through those with you guys. And then you've got pictures and all that kind of stuff, and I'll walk through what I have. By the way, they've submitted all the requirements to even get to this point. And I know this is redundant. It feels like it's a lot of paperwork, but code requires that I have to show that they did an application, they paid for it. We went through the procedures of posting it, but within 15 days, around the 300-foot radius. Everyone that's around that got mailer of what this was. We posted it in the newspaper twice, in both newspapers, Fort Morgan and Brush, and then you put a sign. So all that was code required. We met all of that. All that's fine. And then I did some research in the end of seeing, is this the first time, or is there other examples of this where the lot was split and then the minimums? And so I'm sure you saw that data too. So this is definitely not the first one.
So you did it. I thought maybe he did it. I was going to compliment him on being so thorough. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's...
Well, it was common in the old days in Brush,
Yeah.
as you can tell.
Yes. Yeah, it's very more common than I realized. So when I did the research, it was, one thing that I want to do always is don't set a precedent, because you don't know what's the consequences of once you open Pandora's box. It's hard to close it because you can justify lots of other things. But in this situation, this is not new. This has happened multiple times. And I stopped counting. After that list, it was like, okay, I'm only going in that area that they're in. I didn't even look at the other areas, so it was like, okay, this is easier to swallow a subdivision because there's lots of those. In fact, there's some of these way smaller than what they're even proposing. So thank you for already noticing that. But let's go through the criteria to make sure that they fit and meet the guidelines to even be considered. The first one from section 16.240 under H3C, it says that number one, you have to go through, I think it's 9 questions that they have to evaluate. 9 questions, that's correct. So the first one, it asks that particular and exceptional practical difficulties or an unnecessary and unreasonable hardship will be imposed on the property owner if the provisions of this code are strictly enforced. In their response, the applicant has communicated that the current division of property precludes any buyers from FHA loan, meaning they couldn't sell it to anybody who's first-time home buyers trying to find a home. They couldn't sell it because it doesn't even meet the criteria for them. So it's a hindrance. If the chapter were to allow a plat division with a variance, the current owner would be able to sell the 2 principal structures separately in a future to 2 families in need rather than a single investment property. The FHA would never let them sell it or a buyer buy it as an investment property. And so it fits the requirement of FHA loan if they were to subdivide it. So that's a hardship that they are trying to sell it to somebody they already have one buyer, potential buyer for one. Number two, that the circumstances creating the hardship were created through no fault of the applicant. Well, they didn't create this, they just bought the property before. It was already zoned, it was already built before the zoning was put on it. And so this was built in the 30s, zoning, that didn't get cemented until the 80s, is when we zoned that area, and so it was precluding our code. Number three, exceptional situation or condition which does not occur generally in other properties in the same district. That would be the case if I found no other examples, but I did find plenty of examples, so this is not the first one that's asking for this. Number four, that the variance will not substantially or permanently injure the appropriate use of adjacent conforming properties in the same district. Well, in a nutshell, no. This has already been occurring. There's been many subdivisions of similar properties who have setbacks that are a little crazy because it was before our code established those guidelines. So there's not going to be an injury. There's not going to be the first one that's going to affect many other properties now.
Well, and it's entirely a residential neighborhood.
Correct. Yep. Number five, that the variance, if granted, will not diminish the value, use, or enjoyment of the adjacent properties, nor curtail desirable light, air, and open space neighborhood, or nor change the character of the neighborhood. Nope, not at all. This is,
Probably enhance the victim.
yeah, I mean, in fact, at least it's keeping the single-family concept. You know, it's not a multi-family parcel. And so it's really going back to the original intent of the code for single-family. Number six, that the variance will not alter the essential character or the district in which the property for which the exception is sought or located. No, it's not altering any character. In fact, you'll see the examples. I found at least 10 others that are very similar where they had two parcels and then they subdivided the property. So now that they're single families. Number seven, that the variance will not weaken or the general purpose of this chapter or regulations established herein for the specific district. This is the appropriate board to take this so that the code stays strong and that we keep it consistent. So if we didn't, then it would perpetually be a legally non-conforming use, and we can't, unless they want to change it, then they would have to bring it up to code. So the code would not allow this to happen. So as long as they perpetuate it, they're fine. They're not changing code, so it's not damaging or weakening at all. Number eight, that the variance will be in harmony with the spirit and purposes of the chapter. That's one guideline I love that we have in here. It's one thing to say this, the law. The law is, it's specified specifically of what's going on. The harmony says, okay, in general, we can look throughout the code and it's consistent. And so that's why I always have to give you code sections of what I gather, because we want to make sure it's consistent, that we're not operating outside of that. So I believe this is consistent with the harmony. We're doing it by the book. So that's why we're here to do a variance before we even try to subdivide. Did I do the research to find out that all the others did that? I couldn't find that. I mean, it would have to go back in the microfiche to look for the stuff. And that would take me hours and hours. But I would assume that a lot of those were subdivided wrong. They didn't come here because they're still, the setbacks are not correct on a lot of these others either. So I assumed that we're doing the correct way to make sure that we're being in harmony with the code. Number 9, that the variance will not adversely affect the public health, safety, or welfare. Well, there's nothing that's going to affect that. So I believe after looking at it and talking through them that they fit the requirements of this. It's not a hardship of their own that they created. It's something that they're trying to correct so that they can benefit the community. We've looked at the code already. I've shared with you the zoning, so we all know that it's residential low density. I've communicated what their dilemmas are. So even in the discussion that I've communicated that they do intend to sell it off as single individual parcels. Going into the next section, surrounding area. So this is where I wanted to highlight, if you look at the maps now. So let me turn to Well, let me show one other. If you can go to E1, E1 is a map of a site plan, which is what they've submitted, and you can actually see, if you had not had a chance to look at the parcel yourself, even though I did send you some pictures, but this is kind of like the site plan. I just want to note a couple things on here. 422 Curtis faces Curtis Street, and so that is the front facing of Curtis, and so you have 41.5-foot setback. Normally it's 20 by code, so that's even kind of wonky. That wouldn't have been, in today's code, we would have pushed that up to 20 feet. The side is 17.5 for that parcel, but when you go to Emerson, which is the second principal structure, that's where you see your front setback at 17.5. So it's in line with the others because they were trying to make it consistent. It's no fault of their own, it's just they didn't have a guideline back then. And then as far as the others, that one would have 27 feet on the other side and 19.5. So it's a small parcel that has plenty of room on that small structure on the larger parcel. So that's what that one looks like. Now if you go and look at, I think it's one of my last ones. So I gave you a map showing some of them, and that's M2, and M1 really kind of shows you properties that were already subdivided that were very similar to what they're proposing. Even though this board is not making that decision to subdivide it, that would go to the planning board. But this is only to allow them the first step, which is to have an adjustment of that variance of the setback and the minimum lot size. So as you can see, if you go down, the smallest one I found was 2,000. And that's in the same area too, under residential low density. So that one was subdivided, and then you see another one at 2,500. There's another one, 111 East Eaton at 2,350. So then you see some that are very similar to what they're doing. 116 East Edmonds at the top, second from the top, it's 3,500. So there's already an example of one that's similar. And then you could go down and see they all range from 4,000 to even 7,000. The two that I found on the 7,000 is very interesting. That in our maps, our city parcels, that one is subdivided, but when I looked in the county, it's not subdivided according to the county. So there's a mistake here. It wasn't filed, but it's not 7,000. It's more like 3,500, 3,500 is what our code shows. So I just found that that's a discrepancy that needs to be cleaned up with the county, and they're probably not even aware of it. So, again, probably shows either this was done somehow and not, I mean, it was a long time ago, or it was an illegal subdivision and it never got recorded. But it somehow got recorded on ours. So it's just, I didn't go trying to.
The thing is I lived at 116 East Eden Street back in the 1970s.
Oh, yeah?
And that house is probably a 5-foot setback.
Okay.
I mean, it's at the very end of that
Yeah.
street, and you walk in just a few feet, and there's the house.
Yeah.
You know, so it's nowhere near.
Our
Yeah.
code, that's correct. And I would say that's one that we probably need to clean up somehow to make sure we get it on the record as correct. But we're doing the right thing here. But just to note that. So that's my request in communicating. So I want to offer up questions, and then I'll finish up with my recommendation to you guys. But is there any questions, comments, or feedback?
I just had one, and it was if he planned to do some of the work himself. But from what Neil said, he has a construction company, so I would guess maybe he plans to, or his company plans
Yeah.
to. I just wondered about that.
Yeah, he probably is doing some of the work himself. It's kind of, according to building code, he has to bring that to us, and he would have to be a licensed contractor, which he is, and then he'd have to get the right permits, which our whole system has changed, so everything is online now. We use.
It's kind of a discussion for another day, though.
Yeah, I mean, he's done everything appropriate. He's a contractor himself, too. Good call. Any other questions, comments,
I
concerns?
don't have any questions.
Okay. Well, I'd like to read my recommendation to you guys. Okay, I'm on the last page where it says conclusions. If the board finds that the applicant has not met the 9 applicable standards from section 16-2-40H3C for a variance, staff recommends the variance be denied. Alternatively, if the board finds the applicant has met the 9 applicable standards from section 16-240H3C for a variance, staff recommends the variance to code section 16-410, which is table 5.1, be granted to allow a minimum lot area for 422 Curtis Street and 110 Emerson Street to be under 7,500 square feet. I would have said 3,500, but it's easier just to make it all, it's going to be under 7,500 square feet. That would apply to both lots since they are pursuing a minor subdivision through the planning board. And for 110 Emerson Street to allow a front setback of 17.5 feet with the following conditions. Conditions are good, and this is from staff talking to Dale, our utilities director and everything. When you subdivide, we want to make sure that this is done right according to our utilities. So, for example, the first condition, both principal structures need to have their own separate utility lines. Example, separate water, wastewater, electrical, and gas would have to have separate accounts. So you can't sell off property unless they're separated, because then that's another legal battle that they'll have to go through. So the second condition is all utilities need to be up to code. So for example, I put on here cleanouts need to be put in that wastewater line. If it doesn't have it, when they're separating them out, you might as well separate everything and make it up to code for our
So cleanouts should be installed?
Correct.
It says not installed.
cleanouts not to,
That's an example, not an exception. I think
Yeah.
that EX.
it should be, it's a typo. It should be cleanouts to be installed for wastewater lines.
Okay.
So that's what it should have been. So thanks for catching that. So that's the recommendation. So that will be amended to make sure that when we have that signed off, that it's not cleanouts to be installed. Correct. That's it.
There's only one mistake you made in that whole report, so you ought to feel pretty good about it.
Well, because I have a house with cleanouts and I didn't want to hear that they were not good, you know.
No, it is a good thing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's why I brought that up.
No,
No
okay.
Thank you, Rick. Okay. So we've got the staff report done. There's no one here, the applicant's not here. And I don't have any questions for the applicant, I guess, if they were here. Does anybody? And public testimony. If there's somebody here from the public that this is their opportunity to make a statement either in support or opposition to the petition. And when you're addressing the board, when you come to the podium, would you please state your name and address before making your comments?
Mark Thomas, I live at 419 Curtis Street, directly across the street from 422. And I would recommend that the variance be granted. This man has taken the property and made some improvements. Each house now has its own driveway, so the parking's not a problem. I do know the one house has cleanouts. I don't know about the Emerson Street, but I would recommend that the variance be granted.
Great, thank you for your input. Okay, final questions. Does anybody have any other questions to? Okay, so if that's hearing none, we'll close the public hearing, and I'll call for a motion for a decision regarding the hearing. So I would entertain a motion to grant the variance, and we'll, if someone would make that motion.
Yeah, make a motion that we approve the variance as written, and that we include the conditions that were recommended or required by staff.
Is there a second? Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor?
Do you have to call?
Aye.
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 The voice vote is fine, either
You don't want to do a roll call, do you? We're all in agreement, so. Okay, that passes. Thank you for your time, and guess we can adjourn, huh? We don't, there says unfinished business on the agenda I got, but I don't think we have any unfinished